Lovely to
Hi,
see you
Tim.
again.
You
Uh,
too.
so, Helen, we're now going to be commenting on a wonderful site which I have very many memories of, extraordinary, a golf course in the Isle of Man called by the director Finds on the Fairway. We were supposed to be looking for a kill, an Irish Christian site, but it didn't quite work out that way. Can you tell me what your particular memories are of it and how it all began and where it got to?
Ooh, how it all began, I can't quite remember because the thing that was so remarkable about it was that these two brothers, Nick and Andy Johnson, who were kind of the Isle of Man archaeologists, um, they were quite happy for us to excavate what they thought was the only unexcavated heel in the Isle of Man, and that did make me a bit nervous. That's very high stakes. This is intact. It's the last one left. You can have it.
And
You know,
what's a keel,
oh,
Helen?
a keel is a small chapel. I think it's the same, roughly the same word. It's a kind of cell chapel, small Christian enclosure, small Christian building. So I don't know the relationship precisely between a keel and a church. I assume it's some kind of administrative thing, but they're definitely Christian, and they're part of that kind of Celtic Christianity thing that Mick knew so much about. I never had to answer these questions because Mick, of course, knew exactly what was going on. And it had been kind of saved by the golf course because of course, it hadn't been ploughed up, but it was right on the edge, wasn't it? So there was a field to the other side, and we were expecting to find burials around it. But what we weren't expecting was what we ended up finding, which was that the keel was actually quite late, wasn't it? That building technique with the turf put it well into the Viking Age, kind of 11th century, and yet all the carbon dates that came out were kind of around 600, late 6th, early 7th century. So there's a good few centuries between the burials and the keel that we could see. I suppose it's possible there might have been a wooden one that, had we had the time to totally unpick it, might be. So there's still probably things there. Like with all time teams, you can't finish it in 3 days. All you can do is start it and say, yeah, there's potential there.
We began to find another reality in the excavation.
Well, yes, having all those the burials were. I don't think we were expecting quite so many and quite so weirdly well preserved. I mean, that's one of the things that people kept saying is, why hasn't this filled up with soil? Because all of the burials, there were these kist burials where it's almost like you've made a coffin out of stone. But of course, the stones are not. They're not tight. They're not jointed in together. And right at the beginning, somebody said, "Well, I think this is a void." Knocking on it. What's underneath this void? Could it be a burial? You think, well, of course it couldn't be a burial. I mean, not unless it's only 20 years old. But in fact, that is what had happened. They had never filled up with soil. The soil on top had been completely stable, and that is what allowed, I think, the incredible preservation. Because I will never forget looking in there and seeing what was clearly a plait of hair. It was so distinctive, and I think Jackie said that the thing about bones, the thing about a burial normally is you're only seeing what's inside. You don't see obviously you don't see the clothes, but you also don't see the face. You don't see. I mean, I know there are those clever people at Manchester who can reconstruct a face, but you can't just do it in your imagination. You can never classically ever do anything with hair. And here we had her hair. These people were real. They lived, they died, they plaited their hair. Somebody plaited her hair before they put her in the grave. And it's good sometimes just to be reminded of that.
And extraordinary enough, as we were kind of working on the site, Matt Williams was sort of looking at various bits of slate. Can you?
Yeah, you know why he was looking at bits of slate, Tim? You'd promised the first person, the only person who found an inscription, that you'd buy them a bottle of champagne. And that galvanized everybody. Everybody was looking at bits of stone.
You need all
Everybody was
sorts of
turning everything
motivation.
over.
Sorry? You need all sorts of motivation in archaeology, don't you? Okay, so an Ogham stone, which is?
Ogham is one of those alphabets, like runes, that is based on well, I was going to say based on the Latin alphabet. It's not really, but it's based on. It is a kind of alphabet. Let's put it that way. So each set of lines means a letter, and it's based on these straight lines, which are really easy to carve. So it can be, it could have been carved into wood, or these days the surviving ones are carved in stone. And the idea of Ogham is that it's carved on a stone with an arist. You know that if your stone is flat and square, it'll have 4 angles, and those are known as arists, and they're like vertical lines. And you inscribe your Ogham on either side of this vertical line. But you can scratch it onto a flat stone, but you have to draw a line, and then it comes up and down off that line. And ours was a kind of wiggly line, but it was still a line, and the letters went off at either side. And Ogham is only used, it's got quite a short life, shorter than runes, and it's used in Ireland, and you find them in Cornwall and the Isle of Man and Wales, some parts of Wales and South Scotland. And I think there's only about 400 Ogham inscriptions known, full stop. Some of them can't be read because they're in an unknown language that might be Pictish. Some of them are in Irish Gaelic. I think some of them might be in other languages. Maybe some of them are in Latin. I don't know. So you've got to read it, and then you've got to translate it.
And was it your suggestion that we should contact an academic to send a picture of it? We sent it off to someone.
Finally, I remember having her on the phone, on somebody else's phone probably, and her saying, "Yes, I think it says this." And everybody else was around the Land Rover, and I was saying, "Okay, 50, right?" And it turned out to be such an exciting idea, her translation, that it just made everything perfect. Now, I do know. Well, first of all, I got a lot of.
Can you just tell us, before we go on to what it probably wasn't, what was it, her translation that made?
Her translation was, the first word she felt meant was back, which she thought meant corner and location. The second thing was 50, and then the last word probably meant a group, a flock, a herd, some kind of group. So that's, and did it have the word warrior in it as well?
Yes, I've heard Viking or warrior, I think.
Yes, or maybe the word group implies that it's a group of warriors, but it was definitely, we got the idea that it was 50 warriors at the corner, a group of 50 warriors at the corner. And this sounded almost like a note made at the time. Oh my goodness, quickly, I must chisel this onto a piece of slate and send it home to warn everybody that there's 50 Vikings at the corner. Well, since then, first of all, I've got a lot of stick for holding the wretched thing upside down, for which I have to just blame the fact that Kate Forsyth and I could not discuss which end was which. She just told me how to read it, and I assumed, wrongly it turns out, that I was holding it the right way up. But I also, of course, when you say that the first word was back, meaning corner, it doesn't take much to change a back into a mac. And in that part of the world, mac, of course, means son of. And the main use of Ogham, especially near graves, is as gravestones with names on. So I suppose if we'd had a dreadful old cynic there saying, what's the most likely thing it's going to say, they might have spotted that back might be Mac straight away and said, calm down, everybody, maybe it's just a name. But I still feel that if you're going to put a name on a grave, you would do it more tidily.
What was important about that site, and why should people watch that program? What's the lesson, the takeaway, as we say nowadays?
Well, the nub of it all, I think, for me, came down to those maps. We saw lots of maps showing how the Vikings were arriving down from the north, and how Irish people were moving across the Irish Sea, and how people from Cumbria were moving across, and so on and so forth. All of these people, all of these movements across the Irish Sea, all have to go past the Isle of Man. And it makes you realise how central it is, even though a lot of the time we find it quite easy to ignore. So I think people ought to watch it to simply be reminded that this is a really important place in the history of modern Europe. A lot of things are going on there.
That's fantastic. So thank you very much for your introduction and some great memories from the Finds on the Fairway episode.